Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today for the Maraş Earthquake Conference. This conference is hosted by Insurance Practitioners Association. And as the Deputy Chairman, I would like to first of all, welcome to our event. And I would like to express our gratitude for our speakers, valuable speakers who are with us today. And while we are waiting for Fahri Bey, our president, who was with us all the time, but he's having a technical issue, as far as I see, I would like to present you the speakers. And I will start with Süha Bey. Süha is from our association. He's at the board of directors. Süha Çele from Eureko. Andre Aizele from RMS. Some of you know very well Andy, our dear friend. He's back to our market. And Laura is again together with Andy from RMS, Laura Barksby. And we have Anna Zisfeller from Swiss Re, the market head. Welcome, Anna. We have Jose Farah from Advalora, our experts, our surveyor company. And we have Professor Dr. Sinan Akkar from TRAPT, Tükri Modeling Company. He's the chief modeler. And we have Ahmet Yaşar with us, our board member, and the chief of Maher Group, chief general manager of both companies. Yes, Fahri Bey, finally you are here. And we were very afraid that we lost you. So the ground is yours. And Fahri Altıngöz, our president, please.
Melek Hanım, thank you very much. Sorry, because of the internet connection. So, dear colleagues and all the participants, good afternoon. You are all welcome. As the Insurance Practitioners Association, today we are very happy to be with you in a new conference about Maraş earthquake. First of all, thank you for your participation. We are very pleased to be together with attendees from different countries, from the insurance, reinsurance, and various sectors. The main topic of this conference is Maraş earthquake, and we will discuss about details on consequences of this major earthquake, event definition, modeling results, business interruption impacts, post-implication and event search, lessons learned, and reinsurance renewal for 2024. Today, we will have an efficient platform to exchange ideas by distinguished speakers from Turkey and global insurance and reinsurance markets. There will be 6 speakers in our conference: Andre and Laura from RMS, Anna from Swiss Re, Joseph from Advalora, Süha from Eureko, and Sinan Hocam from Tükri TRAPT. I would like to welcome and thank them for their contribution. I am sure their presentation will be very useful for all of us. Each speaker will have a presentation for 15 to 20 minutes. During the presentations, we are expecting your questions as well. Please write down your questions by mentioning the name of the speaker you ask. Please use Q&A platform which is on your screen. As the moderator, I will revert your questions to related speakers at the end of the presentations. I will also introduce you each speaker before their presentations. So let me introduce the first speaker, Andre Aizele. Andre is currently working at Moody's RMS in Zurich as client director in charge of sales and business development for Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Spain, and Middle East and Africa. Before joining Moody's RMS 3 years ago, he was the CEO of Pacific region for Guy Carpenter in Sydney. Before Guy Carpenter, he worked for Swiss Re for 17 years. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology in USA and London School of Economics in the UK. He has a Master of Business Management degree in Switzerland. Now the stage is yours, Andy, please.
Thank you very much, Fahri Bey, and I hope everybody can hear me. Let me just quickly go to my screen and Can you see that, Farid? Everything's okay. So, again, thank you to the audience for making yourself available today. I know it's busy times for everybody, and especially for the Turkish market after the terrible and tragic events that happened a few months ago, even busier days than normal. So I appreciate, obviously, the stage. And thank you once again, Mineshke Hanim, Farid Bey, and the audience for making yourself available. So quickly to scroll down my screen, and we go here. So today, Moody's RMS will be presenting two sets of presentation. The first one, which I speak to, is more some high-level comments I'd like to give, given my personal historic connections in the Turkish market. I worked, as many of you know, for many, many years as Swiss Re leader in the market, and it's a market that is very, very close to me in the heart. So even more special now when I touch the market again and from a very different angle, looking at it from the Moody's RMS side, and obviously seeing what happened a few months ago. There's a lot of personal observations I want to quickly give before we get to the more technical stuff. So I'll be delivering mostly the more high-level observations and some of the kind of key notes I want to give at the beginning on behalf of the company and on behalf of Andy. And then my colleague Laura will be giving the more technical part on the actual earthquake itself, the learnings, and the RMS position around what we did, how we calculated the loss, and other things that you would be interested in. So just to give you a bit of the roadmap for the presentation, I will first give just one or two very quick opening words on the Maraş earthquakes in Turkey. And yeah, I want everyone to hear that. I will quickly then introduce you to, at a very, very quick level, into Moody's RMS, because obviously we've been introduced as RMS, and we are RMS, but RMS has been recently acquired by Moody's, and we're now Moody's RMS. So we're actually a much larger company that's touching the Turkish market in many different forms compared to before, with many different sets of clients. So I'd like everybody to quickly understand just about how does RMS fit within Moody's, and let's say Moody's rating agency for those of you who deal with that part of the company. I want to give you just one slide on some personal observations. Again, having worked at Swiss Re for many years in different markets, having worked as a broker, and then now working as kind of an IP service provider to the industry, I've seen very different angles of the very large value chain. And it's important, I think, to put certain things into perspective. So as many of you, and maybe in the Turkish market, see this as a major large event or two large events, which they were, there's many lessons learned and many similarities to other large events I've seen in my own career working around the world, where I'd like to quickly just point that out to everybody on the call. And then obviously we quickly transition to the more important part of the RMS delivery today, which is Laura Barksby's key presentation on modeling the Maraş earthquake events in Turkey and everything else. So anyhow, I guess quickly a few words on the Maraş events, I guess opening words on the Maraş events and earthquakes in Turkey. As an industry, we sit here naturally, you know, playing different roles, whether you're an insurer, a reinsurer, a broker, an agent, a loss adjuster, or a model IP data provider. And we talk about these things, you know, in quite, you know, elegant forms, and they're important subjects. But we need to remember that many people lost their lives in these two particular events. And many of you actually were supporting the rumble and the mess that happened. And I think we all should just, of course, take a moment to give condolences to those that were affected. These are tragic events. They do bring us closer together as an industry. They do allow us to see the parts that went right in the industry between the different players and the parts that went wrong. And it gives us a chance to correct it. And that's difficult through earthquake events because they're severity events. They're not like storms or floods, which are more frequency events where you can have more experience around it. These events tend to, thank God, be quite isolated, and very often they only happen certain times in people's lifetime, if any. So yes, we do have here two big ones and with a lot of learnings, but before we go into the details of this and that from a scientific or a commercial perspective, I think it's important to say condolences naturally to those of you who lost either friends or who had people that were personally affected by this. And trust me, when those of you who know me and my style and my love of Turkey and the Turkish market and of the Turkish people, this was a crazy event. I woke up with one of my dear clients calling me at 5 in the morning like crazy on my WhatsApp, and that doesn't normally happen in the Turkish market, a 5 o'clock wake-up call, and I knew something was happening. And again, so God bless, and it's to all of us now to really work for a better tomorrow. So that's an important thing to say. The other one I want to quickly say on the opening words for these Maraş events in Turkey, RMS obviously has a pivotal role in the industry. We obviously are a market currency at the moment used by many buyers and sellers of trading risk. So we take that role very, very seriously. And Laura will go into the details of what we've actually done for our clients and for the, let's say, the greater society right after that event, and what we're doing today to make it better from our side. But, you know, we do take that role very seriously. And again, we're very, very proud to be on stage. And thank you once again to the organizer for allowing us to be here and to actually speak to the subject. So that's two of the very important things I wanted to start this conference with. Just very quickly, and again, this is not a sales talk, but I do want people to understand a bit of where we fit within this organization and why Moody's decided to buy us, and maybe not some of our competitors or others in the market, and why we will make a difference and continue to make a difference. So just very, very quickly, for those of you, Moody's as an organization is divided into two parts. You have Moody's rating agency, which is called Moody's Investor Services. That's the part that many of you actually know. Moody's has also Moody's Analytics. Moody's Analytics is, again, risk tech analytics for banks, for corporates, for insurers, reinsurers, brokers, in all different formats. And Moody's Analytics business was basically the part that bought Moody's RMS. So we belong to Moody's Analytics. And today, just so you know, the Moody's Analytics business is actually bigger than our rating agency business. Very quickly, we do have, and when we speak now, we're not just obviously in one market looking at things from one view. We have a wide range, a very wide range of experience and professionals in all different types of jobs, as you can see here in the slide. And we touch customers in all different types of markets with all different types of positions. And again, we are a global company, and Turkey was important to, RMS before Moody's bought us. And now that Moody's has bought us, it's even more important to us, as we have even a much bigger customer base and, let's say, touch base in the Turkish market and interest to make things more resilient for tomorrow. Again, very last slide on the Moody's part, just we have a whole range of supporting our clients. So it's not just the Nat Cat, which you see here on the slide, which is really the RMS dominant part, but everything from, you know, actuarial modeling to regulatory IFRS modeling to asset management to climate change. So again, we do have a wide range of expertise, and we're proud about that. And that's also one of the reasons why Moody's decided to buy RMS, is so they can complement their entire risk of expertise with the Nat Cat piece now as well. On the RMS side, and many of you know that when you look at us specifically, we are, since we incepted back at Stanford University, the market currency for most markets around the world, where we of course have partnerships with most of the key reinsurers and insurers. Brokers are our key clients, and as you can see from this slide, we have a wide range of expertise. When it comes to Turkey specifically, we have, of course, the earthquake model, which is part of the currency pin of what we'll be discussing today with what happened in the Maraş earthquakes. But we also have now flood models, just for those of you on the call to be aware of. And we also have terrorism models and others. But we are continuously investing into this market because we do believe in the Turkish market. And that's a key point to make here. Last slide, and then I'm going to go into my observations. It does make a difference to work with us. And, when I was a reinsurer, when prices went up, people complained. When prices went down, we complained. When I'm a modeler, if you underestimate the loss, people complain. If you overestimate the loss, people complain. The loss is never estimated correctly anyhow in a severity event. But we have models to be best estimations. And one key point here is, and we'll talk about Turkey specifically, but if I remember correctly, not to, let's say, point at anybody else, but when I remember correctly, just a few days, 2 weeks after the events in Turkey, we came out with market loss estimations of around 5.5 billion plus. Some of our competitors were around 1 or 2 billion. So that's a big range in terms of how you see this particular market loss. And we know that this is a big one that will creep. And I believe some of our panelists today will talk about PLA issues here as well. But what this slide actually shows you, and I think this is an important point, is that people that work with RMS globally, and it goes back to the slide that showed you earlier, do have better financial underwriting results than those who don't. And I do want to underpin that as well. So as much as our model, of course, has had certain good things in this event from its performance and certain things that need to be worked on, it's always better to be able to have some assessment of that modeled risk to give them market mechanisms to trade it and to transfer it. So in that sense, we will continue to get better and better as we help our Turkish clients evolve as well. Last point, last slide for me, and I guess this is a key one I wanted to add. From a personal perspective, having years and years of experience, I always tell people, even my colleagues and friends and clients, I have a lot of reinsurance experience. I'm still learning about technology, but I do have a lot of reinsurance experience from many different markets and several different hats. And there's a few things I want to just very high level mention here, because you can imagine the kind of comments I received also in my numerous roles after an event like this one. So the first one is very simple. When I've seen, again, in my different hats, different big, what I call severity events, these can be earthquakes like we had now in Turkey. These could be earthquake in Chile. This could be the earthquake in Christchurch, which, many reinsurers call the gift that keeps on giving, which, completely had to be, remodeled New Zealand to a certain perspective, and even other storm events. Most large industry events are either over or underestimated. And I think experience shows that. I mean, I think it's very, very rare to see a very big, severity event, and even look at Ian in the US and say, that's exactly the right figure. Again, models are estimations of possible losses. And possible losses, especially when it comes down to things like earthquakes, can come in all different forms and shapes. And later we'll talk about how we selected the loss events post these events to give to the market. And Laura will speak on the details. She's the one who's the earthquake expert. But I know as a commercial professional in this business that, we tend to get it always wrong, but we can get it better. And I think that's where we continue to invest. What I can say is I think we did a decently good job in tracking this particular event. But there's a lot of things that we will be learning and applying to our upgraded models that we'll be developing for Turkey. The second one is very quickly, market resilience post the loss depends on many factors and players. So everybody will tend to point fingers at each other to a certain degree on this or that, but it's actually the reinsurers and the insurers in their partnerships. It's the loss modelers that update their model in good time with the right inputs, but in good time, not rash time, in good time, and take the lessons from the events to add then that chemistry to the market. It's the loss adjusters that do their work and bring back their findings. So I'm very happy to see a conference like this happening where different important players come together and speak and give a certain view so that we can continue to make Turkey even more resilient. And I do say, thank God it's Turkey, right? Because many other countries in this area, if an event like this would happen, you would have no TCIP. You would have a much lower earthquake penetration and much more crap to fix after the events. We have a good start. We have a smart industry, so it's all about how we come together. The third one is that you will always see Adam Smith's invisible hand come to play. So it's funny, earlier when Meneshke Hanin, and bless her for always organizing these great events, when she said, Andy, you'll be doing this, and Suha, you do this, and she mentioned, of course, the role of Sri and Anna, and everyone wants to hear, okay, all of this, but what does it mean to price? What does it mean to price? And the market is driven often by price. So
dear Andy, it hurts me to interrupt, but we really need to move on, my dear. Okay.
Yeah, I will. Perfect. Yeah, so basically that will, and then you'll see a lot of learnings post the event, which will be applied. And obviously new models with adjustment do take some time, and we're working on that. So I'll give the floor now to Laura. She has many of our key technical messages to deliver. So thank you very much.
Dear Andy, thank you very much for your presentation, especially observations after large industry events part was very interesting, which highlighted lessons learned topics. So now our next speaker is again from RMS, Laura. Hi, Laura. I know that you will present us the modeling outputs. Before that, I would like to give very brief information about your background. Laura Barksby joined RMS in 2014. She's a senior product manager in the Global Earthquake Model product management team based in London. She is responsible for the earthquake model, including Turkey, New Zealand, Australia, and Central and South Africa earthquake models. Laura is a certified catastrophe risk analyst and holds the bachelor's degree in geography and master's degree in risk and environmental hazard from Durham University. Yes, Laura, stage is yours, please.
Thank you. And again, just to reiterate Andy's words at the beginning for everybody joining, and thank you for the invitation for today. So I'm going to build on Andy's presentation and look much more closely at the Maraş earthquakes, how we modelled them at RMS, and also what we've learned from them so far. Just a very quick introduction. I'm just one representative for a much larger team at Moody's RMS. We have earthquake models across 80 countries and territories, and our Turkey earthquake model falls within a wider Europe earthquake model. We've got over 20 model developers across the source model, ground motion model, geotechnical tsunami and vulnerability components, and many of those developers were heavily involved in our event response for Turkey. We also have a dedicated event response team, and last year they responded to over 120 events, not just earthquakes, across all perils. Our development team are heavily involved in active research. You can see some examples of organisations, publications and scientific committees that they're part of. So I just want to acknowledge that I am one person part of a much larger team. So moving on to the sequence itself, I'm going to start with a timeline for our event response at RMS. So of course, the two largest earthquakes happened on the 6th of February. And on that same day, our event response team released accumulation information for both earthquakes based on the available USGS shake maps. So this essentially identified affected postal codes for both earthquakes. A couple of days later, when there was some more information available, we then used our stochastic event set to determine suitable events for you to use as modelling for both earthquakes. A week after the events, we further refined this. So we actually released user-defined events, which we felt were a much better representation for the magnitude 7.8 and 7.5 earthquakes. And 2 weeks after the event, we released our industry loss estimate, and I'll go into more information about this towards the end of my slides. So moving on now, I want to look more closely at these events and how we determined our modelling solutions, as well as how we validated them against the available data. I want to start with some context to put the events into context around the seismicity in this region. So generally the tectonics are well understood in this area, but the faults are very geometrically complex. They have multiple branches, and how they connect between branches is not so well understood. We do, however, have a relatively good earthquake history in this region. So we know that on the East Anatolian fault zone, we've seen several large magnitude type events, the most recent of which were in the 1800s. And we actually saw multiple magnitude 7 and larger earthquakes in that century. This is quite typical of what we see in the region, where we see more episodic or clustering of events. So looking at the sequence itself, this map shows the 24-hour period after the largest earthquake, and each of those points on the map represents an aftershock or related events. And then there's a timeline underneath the map that shows the 2-week period with the aftershock sequence following the 7.8 event. So of course, the sequence started with the largest 7.8 event. This ruptured several branches of the East Anatolian fault, and it from the southern end of the Nali segment all along the main fault. This then triggered a magnitude 7.5 event. Now, what was significant about this was not only it was very similar in magnitude to the previous earthquake, but it happened in such a short space of time. It's very unusual to see that in Turkey and also globally. So the USGS estimate that only about 1 in 20 earthquakes are followed by a similar sized event, which is exactly what we saw in February. Both events were very complex. They ruptured multiple faults and fault branches, and it was a very productive sequence, as you can see from the timeline at the bottom of the screen. So before I go into how we modeled the RMS, I want to acknowledge the amount of data that we were able to take advantage of. The scientific community were very active immediately following the events and were really open in sharing data. And that was a huge help for us at RMS to help provide the industry with the best representation of these events. We had information from the USGS, but also the Middle East Technical University, the Earthquake Engineering Research Centre, Kandilli Observatory, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanisation and Climate Change. There were a huge number of ground motion recordings available from AFAD. We spoke with local professors, the list goes on. We were able to take advantage of really valuable data across all aspects of our modelling. Now, of course, immediately following the event, the data does evolve with time. And so this was why we were able to further refine our event solutions. So moving on to how we determined our modelling event selections. We started with a stochastic event set initially. This was based on our existing event set in our Turkey model, which has around 50,000 events that impact Turkey. But as more data became available and we were able to look more closely and understand these events better, we felt it was more important to further refine these events. And so what we did was to release 2 user-defined events, one for the 7.8 earthquake and a separate one for the 7.5 earthquake. And for these events, we were able to specifically define the magnitude, the latitude and longitude, the length, the directivity, many aspects that made a better solution for you as an industry to understand these events. Given the geometry of the East Anatolian Fault and the magnitude, particularly of the 7.8 event, we defined this earthquake using 2 segments. So that's what you can see by the southern segment and the northern segment on this map here. That is to represent our 7.8 earthquake. And then the single individual line that's towards the north represents the magnitude 7.5 event. So once we defined these segments, we then looked into validating them against the data, and I'll show you these in the next slides. So starting with the ground motions, this was fundamental to helping us define these user-defined events in the first place. The map on the right shows our user-defined selection for the magnitude 7.8 earthquake, and it shows the 0.5 second spectral acceleration. Essentially, the darker the colour, the higher the ground motion. And then the triangles represent the seismic stations that had ground motion recordings from this event. And so first and foremost, what you can see is there's a very wide spatial variability in the ground motion amplitudes. And this varies with what we call building period or building height, and also local site conditions. We saw from these events that the local site conditions played a really important role in not only the ground motions, but also the extent of the damage. So these included things like basin effects, rupture directivity, given the complexity of these fault ruptures. Soft soil conditions amplified the ground motions, and we also had instances of liquefaction. So the local effects really further added to this complicated picture. But overall, we feel that our modelled footprint, which you can see on the right, agrees well with those coloured triangles, which are the observed recordings from seismic stations. And this is particularly in the most affected regions where we saw the greatest damage. And that's where we feel was most important to give you the best view of the risk at the time. So what did the building stock look like in this region? Well, predominantly we saw reinforced concrete structures with masonry infill, and these were typically mid-rise structures, 4 to 7 stories. Now, this is particularly important when I come to the next slide. And generally, these were multi-family residential properties that were impacted the most. One big lesson from the vulnerability perspective that came out of the February events was with respect to the zoning amnesty that has been in Turkey for many decades really now. It started post-World War II when many people moved from rural to more urban areas. And as a result, there was a boom in construction. But these didn't necessarily always follow the building code or follow the same construction oversight. That said, because of the situation, these properties were allowed to remain. And this amnesty program has continued since its adoption in 1948. And so as of last year, it was estimated that up to 75,000 buildings had permits to remain through these amnesty programs in the affected area from the February earthquakes. And this was a big part of the story and also will be a big part of the lessons learned going forward. We're still very much learning about the quality of the building inspections, enforcement of the code with respect to the zoning amnesty, but also beyond that. So moving on to the combination of the ground motions and building damage. So this was very important with respect, as I've mentioned already, to the high variability in the intensity of shaking. And what we saw when we looked closely at the ground motion recordings compared to the building design code was that in many instances, the ground motions far exceeded what buildings were intended to withstand. So again, this map shows the black line representing our user-defined event for the magnitude 7.8 earthquake, and each of those triangles represents a seismic station that had ground motion recordings from this earthquake. Now, these four charts, they may look rather complicated, but I want to just summarize them quickly. Essentially, each one of these graphs is the ground motion recording from a different one of the seismic stations, or a different one of the triangles on this image. The blue and the red lines represent the observed ground motions for the magnitude 7.8 earthquake. And then the black and the grey lines represent different building standards. Generally, building codes typically follow the black line. Now, what I want to highlight are a couple of things from these. You can see that in some instances, the red and the blue lines actually fall within or very close to the black line, which is the building design code. And so in those instances, it's where we would expect the building to perform relatively well in this earthquake. But what you can also see, if I highlight these two graphs here, is that these are from two seismic stations very close together. And so generally speaking, you might assume that the ground motions would be very similar. But what you can see if you compare these two graphs is that there is a big difference between the red and the blue lines. So the graph on the right-hand side shows much larger ground motions compared to the graph on the left. And it's in that instance where we saw the significant damage to many buildings as a result of exceeding the building design code. Now, the difference between the ground motions on these two graphs, again, is not a simple story. It's very much driven by local site conditions. So it may be soft soils are more prevalent in one of these locations, or there may be an element of rupture directivity. Another point I want to highlight, though, is if we take the graph on the left-hand side, you can see that in some instances, the red and the blue lines fall below the building design black line. And so in those instances, the buildings would be expected to perform relatively well. But you can see as we move further across the x-axis towards 0.5 up to around 2 seconds, you can see that those ground motions start to exceed the building design code. And that typically correlates that range with the mid-rise to taller structures. So that was a theme that we very much saw in these earthquakes, was that in some cases, low-rise buildings performed relatively well, but for mid-rise structures, we saw a considerable amount of damage. So I want to move on now to our loss estimate. So taking the user-defined events that I've just discussed, we combined the loss for both of these events together and calculated it for ground shaking and liquefaction. Our loss estimate includes building, contents, and business interruption coverage, and it covers the three main lines of business. So that's residential, commercial, and industrial lines. And the insured loss does include those to the TCIP. The results are based on our version 11 Europe earthquake model, of which I mentioned Turkey is part of that region. And it's based on an internal exposure database that we have adjusted for primary characteristics coding. So based on all of these factors, the Moody's RMS insured estimate is for over $5 billion from both of these events. And the economic loss is expected to exceed over $25 billion. There are some important non-model considerations, and many of these will be discussed by other members of the panel today. That includes post-event loss amplification. This is very uncertain, particularly in an instance where there's been such devastation. It's not clear going forward how long the rebuilding practices will take, and also what practices they will take going forward. What will they do with respect to the building code? How will that look? There are also things such as post-event inflation, additional living expenses, and specific lines of business that are not included in this estimate. So to summarize, what have we learned? First and foremost, these were extremely tragic events. And as Andy touched on, it's fortunate that these are infrequent, thankfully. What's most important now is how we learn from these events. Large earthquakes, whilst tragic, do often generate a wealth of data. And so we're able to really take advantage of that at Moody's RMS with respect to our modelling. So these very complicated events have given us not only a wealth of insight, but also data to help us inform our active work on a model update. We had actually started work on an update to our Turkey earthquake model and the wider Europe region before these earthquakes. And the February events have given us a huge amount of data to further improve on that work as we go forward. So I just want to spend the next few moments summarizing some of the really key things that we can learn from these earthquakes from a modeling perspective. Firstly, as I've mentioned, the seismicity in this region is very complex. We saw that from these events, which had multiple faults and multiple branches rupturing together. And not only that, but we saw the potential for very large triggered events in a short space of time. Going forward at Moody's RMS, we are now looking at how we can represent these types of event clusters in this region, as well as how we can include multi-fault ruptures in our event set. So this is when we assume not just one fault will rupture as part of an earthquake, but there's potential for it to trigger further rupturing on other faults and fault branches. I've mentioned the wealth of ground motion data generated from these earthquakes. And not only that, but there was a significant impact from local site conditions and basin response. We will be using the ground motion data to assess the performance of the latest ground motion models, so we can update our ground motion prediction equations, as well as look at local site conditions and the addition of sedimentary basins. Finally, from a vulnerability perspective, we still need to understand better the adherence to the building code, as this was weaker than we had anticipated, particularly for newer construction. And whilst we need to understand what this will look like in the future for this region of Turkey, we also need to understand the scale of it across the country as a whole. How the region will rebuild will really inform our updates to our vulnerability functions, as well as future perspectives on post-event loss amplification. I've just listed some of the resources that we have released from Moody's RMS around these events. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this important presentation. You mentioned very interesting outputs and technical aspects on Maraş earthquake indeed. As you mentioned, lessons learned following these events. Here, I would like to ask you a question. How will the results of Maraş earthquake affect the inputs of your model in terms of newer constructions post-1999? Will there be any deep analysis or is there any revision in your model currently, especially for Marmara potential earthquake?
So our current model includes insights from the 1999 earthquake. We had some site visits following that earthquake where we used the lessons learned to inform our vulnerability curves for the time. And so the current model actually includes more vulnerable functions for this region in particular. But going forward, there's obviously a huge amount to learn from these events. We didn't necessarily know the extent of these amnesty programs. And over time, particularly as claims come in and there is a more refined view of the overall damage, we will definitely be incorporating that into our vulnerability functions. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking to understand the wider view of building stock in Turkey, including sort of around the Marmara region, because we're very aware that that is such an important scenario and very real threat to the Turkey population and building stock. And so just recently, we did quite a lot of work on a stress test for the Istanbul region, looking at which events could cause significant damage. But going forward, we are very actively working on a new model for Turkey and Europe more broadly. And so I suppose I open up to the audience to please get in contact with us if you would like to be involved in that process, because we always like to build models at RMS with the market. But I feel like after these very significant events, it's even more important that we have as much involvement from local companies in Turkey as part of that process. So there's a lot of work to do and a lot of lessons to learn, but we are actively looking into that now.
Okay, Laura, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I'm giving the stage to our speaker, Professor Sinan Akkar from TİRAPT, Turkey. He will have his presentation about modeling outputs. Welcome, Sinan Hocam. Before your presentation, I would like to give very brief information about your background. Sinan Bey is currently the principal modeler of earthquake catastrophe at Türk Reassurans AŞ. He served as a full-time professor at the Middle East Technical University and Boğaziçi University between 2003 and 2021. Sinan Akkar has performed several studies in ground motion modeling, probabilistic earthquake hazard, and risk analysis during his professional career. Professor Akkar acted as the principal investigator of National Seismic Hazard Map and revision of the earthquake premiums for TCIP and Insurance Association of Turkey. He published more than 200 technical papers, including a book. He is a member of the board of directors in International Earthquake Engineering Association, Turkish Earthquake Foundation, and the editorial board member of Journal of Earthquake Engineering. Yes, Sinan Bey. Sinan Hocam, stage is yours, please.
Fahri Bey, thank you very much for this introduction. As you have indicated, I'm a university professor, which means I'm going to give my talk just like a university professor. So I hope it's not going to be boring for the audience as well as for the rest of the panelists. And as a university professor, I'm going to use my pen to highlight some of the points here. The Kahramanmaraş earthquakes, sort of one of the biggest events I have ever experienced throughout my professional life. And essentially, I myself, as well as the contributors to this presentation here, we learned significantly from these events. Well, what I'm going to present you actually is entirely from the modeling perspective, loss modeling perspective. And actually, this presentation, I'll be given sort of another very similar one of this presentation in Italy next week at GEM conference. So this is going to be some sort of shortened version of that talk or of that presentation. All right, so this is the outline of my presentation. So first I'm going to give an overview of Kahramanmaraş earthquakes. Then the slides that I'm going to show are more on the TCIP insured portfolios, because I mean, in terms of data, the data are rich enough to make some general or overall conclusions for loss modeling. And I'm going to present some of our case studies and observations and which we implemented to our CatMod catastrophe modeling platform for running loss modeling for future events like the ones that are likely to that are expected in the Marmara region. And I'm going to drive some conclusions from our observations. All right. So this is this little bit of background from Kahramanmaraş earthquakes. Actually, Laura has already given a very nice background of it. Again, you see the footprints of the aftershocks of the Kahramanmaraş earthquakes here. The first main shock occurred on the main, say, Eastern Anatolian fault zone, and the second event, right, occurred on one of the faults or sub-segments of the Eastern Anatolian fault zone. Essentially, this region, in terms of large events, has been silent for many years. By saying large events, I refer to events of magnitudes larger than 7. There are, say, from historical recordings, there are 2 very large events on the southwest part of the Eastern Anatolian fault zone, which occurred in 1513, and then there is one another, the magnitude is unknown, which occurred in the 12th century. These events, but these events are the only largest ever recorded, say, earthquakes on the southwestern segments of the Eastern Anatolian fault. In terms of the, say, subfault here, which is called as Çardak-Sürgü fault, the last biggest event occurred in the 16th century in 1544, and right after that, this fault was also silent, has been silent in terms of large events, though in this region we have seen, and I'm talking about this part only, we have seen many small events. So it is seismically active, essentially. All right. So right after the Kahramanmaraş events, we contacted as the company, we contacted the local seismologists here, and then asked their assistance to delineate the ruptured segments, the ruptured fault geometries, and to have their opinion about the connection between these 2 major events. Essentially, what I'm showing here is the stress distribution of the first event, which occurred here, close to Gaziantep, but within the boundaries of Kahramanmaraş province, and the stress distribution of the first event here indicates that there is a kind of surcharge towards the Çardak-Sürgü fault segment, and that excessive stress surcharge essentially fastened the rupture or caused the rupture of this second subfault here, and because of the high slip rate during the rupture, the second event has a large magnitude, which is around 7.6. And the difficult, and the challenging point here is that because of this excessive stress surcharging on the on this segment here, the second event occurred 9 hours, approximately 9 hours after the first event. There are various interesting seismological features which we observed during these events. As Laura also indicated, we have the first rupture here, the first event here is actually a bilateral rupture, which means some part of the waveforms radiate towards Antakya, Hatay, but then the rupture of the fault propagates towards Hatay, Antakya province, Antakya city, and then some portion of the rupture propagates towards Adıyaman, Malatya, and the seismic waves also propagate towards these cities or regions, which essentially resulted in a phenomenon called rupture directivity in this earthquake. So the rupture directivity essentially is when the rupture propagation, the propagation of the waves, and the rupture itself is aligned, the amplitude of the waveforms are significantly large with respect to the normal events. So in terms of modeling, we have to consider these in our estimated ground motions, this phenomenon in our estimated ground motions. So here what I'm showing is the ruptured segment which we use in our ground motion modeling for the first event and for the second event. And at this point, our scientists, the seismologists, preferred using Harvard central moment tensor solution. So it is not really that much different than, for example, the one revealed by AFAD and then revealed by US Geological Survey, but we used this solution while developing our ground motion fields to represent the seismic hazard in this region for these two particular events. And this slide here shows how we model our ground motions for this particular events, because we observe rupture directivity effects. We wanted to use it in our modeling. So essentially here, the black circles triangles, reverse triangles here represent the recording stations, seismic recording stations, where we see the dominant rupture directivity for the first event. And the red color here, red to orange color here, indicate our model's findings in terms of forward directivity. So in that sense, for the first event, we are doing a very good job. We are align with what is observed in the field and what is modeled in our computers, what is simulated in our computers. Again, this is the same type of modeling for the second event. Now, again, we are, the reddish color here shows the dominant forward directivity regions. And at this point, unfortunately, for the second event, because of the problems in the recording stations, not too many, but only two, not too many, but only two recording stations captured the forward directivity effects, and they are again consistent with our modeling. Okay, so this is a typical ground motion field we developed to represent the, say, seismic hazard in the region specific to these, to the first event and to the second event. All right. Now, I know this community is not very familiar with the probabilistic terms or modeling terms, but I want to make an overview here to make you understand which modeling components are quite important for estimating reliable losses. So the first component here is actually will give you the loss, the insurance loss, for example, conditioned on a specific ground motion value, all right? And basically what we call it as modelers is the vulnerability model. By saying the vulnerability model, I'm talking about a probabilistic distribution. And then this component here is actually giving you the, again, the occurrence probability of the ground motion value, which we use in our vulnerability model. And inherently, the ground motion amplitude is dependent on the site condition or the soil condition where the risk is sitting. And then, of course, we have to consider the uncertainty in estimating the soil conditions where the risk is sitting. So then there is a probability of occurrence of the site value, site condition we are defining to perform this entire process. So essentially, we have a vulnerability component, then we have a ground motion component, which is actually dependent on the site condition, and we have the site condition itself. So essentially, this expression here indicates that the uncertainty in the vulnerability model, the site conditions at the site of interest, will be very important for unbiased representation of the hazard. Now, because we are performing loss analyses for large building portfolios, the uncertainty in the spatial distribution of portfolio, as well as its granularity, by saying the granularity in terms of the physical properties defining the structural types and so forth, are the other points that we need to focus on in our loss model. And the challenging stuff here, which we faced in the Kahramanmaraş earthquakes, is that, as I try to state, the two major events occurred with 9 hours difference, which amplify the damage of the insured assets in the portfolio. And we need to make a smart assumption on describing this effect on the portfolio loss. If we are to deal with a single risk, there are some ways to do it. But if you are to deal with large portfolios, as we are doing in the reinsurance sector, then you need to come up with another, say, approach to represent, to idealize the sequential effects of these large events on the portfolios, So basically, what we did in our sensitivity analysis is that we focused on the uncertainty in site conditions. And for that, we are using the shear wave velocity in the average shear wave velocity at the sites. So we performed sensitivity analysis by making use of the mean or median soil condition and the distribution of the soil condition. And then we focused on the spatial distribution of the portfolio because we are observing that some of the portfolios are delivered to us as lumped at the sub-province centers, lumped at each sub-province, and some of the portfolios are delivered to us, say, spatially distributed over the region of interest. So we focused on spatial portfolio distribution of portfolio. We focused on the vulnerability models. We could be using the mean curve of the vulnerability model or the vulnerability as a distribution, either the mean or the vulnerability model as a distribution. And then we looked at the granularity of portfolio again, because some companies, some of the portfolios we are delivering, the level of, say, granularity is different according to the information they have from their portfolio. So we looked at the granularity of portfolio in our analyses, the sensitivities, and then, of course, we came up with a method for modeling two sequential events, which could be handled by treating them as separate events, or which could be handled by aggregating the damage effects in a smart way and physically reasonable way of these two sequential events with alternative damage models. All right. So this is actually, I'll be fast enough. This is actually showing the site condition uncertainty in terms of shear wave velocity, which is used for defining the site conditions. So we are using different grid sites. We sort of model the region with different grid sizes, all right? Starting from very fine grid sizes like 0.025 degrees, which means approximately 3 kilometers by 1.5 kilometers. Then we have grid sizes of, say, 0.05 degrees, which is around 6 to 3 kilometers, 6 by 3 kilometers. And then you double it 12 by grid size of 0.1 degrees, which is like 12 kilometers to 6 kilometers, and then the sub-province centers. So the site conditions are assumed to be valid for the entire sub-province. All right. So what I'm showing here is the mean distribution of site conditions, and here the sort of tail, the upper end, the 84 percentile. I apologize for these terminologies. Yeah, if I'm getting quite complicated, which means actually, if I assume that everything in terms of site conditions is average, I'm going to get this picture. So, which means my sites are going to be mostly on the soft to stiff soil sites, if I'm just assuming the average or sort of the median. But if I consider the uncertainty in the site conditions, these sites could become sort of the very hard, very stiff to rock sites, because you cannot go and measure the site condition at each coordinate. So you are making some background information to come up with the site conditions in your model. And if you don't consider the uncertainty, so if you just assume that everything is on average, that's what you're going to get as the picture. But if you assume that there is this uncertainty in your modeling of site, then you may end up with, there is also a probability of having this type of site condition as an alternative. So we looked at this in our modeling. Again, the special distribution of the portfolio. Now, the portfolio here I'm considering is, I'm only focusing on the Kahramanmaraş province here. So if you lay your portfolio over 0.025 degrees grids, this is the picture you get. White color here indicates that there is no building in these regions, and then darker color indicates that the population of buildings is very dense there. And then if you overlay the same portfolio to 0.05, 0.10, and only in terms of sub-provinces, that's the picture you're going to get. So essentially, from this picture to this picture, you're making a huge difference in terms of estimating the losses, because if you have a portfolio distribution described over fine cells, the ground motions that you will be using will also be finer. Whereas if you are describing your portfolio only at the sub-province centers, then the ground motions that you will be using is quite coarse, and this will make a difference in your loss calculations. And again, as I told you, this is a typical vulnerability model we're using to describe the relation between ground motion intensity. So this is the ground motion, and this is the damage. So to describe the to relate ground motion with the damage. So essentially, you can use the mean vulnerability curve, or you can assume it as a distribution. So here, for a given peak ground velocity, the estimated damage will be something like this if you're using mean. But if you are using a distribution, which I try to represent it here as a distribution here, the damage can be anywhere in between. So this is also what we looked in our analysis. Again, the other thing is that the portfolio granularity. So say that we have a portfolio as is original portfolio, and there are different building types. So these two building types, for example, are built before 1975. This building group is built between 1975 and 1999, and then this building group is built after 2000, all right? And now each group, of course, has different, can be subgrouped in terms of different building heights. So if you shrink this, say, portfolio granularity by disregarding the building height and by describing everything in terms of construction periods or construction times, or if you shrink this portfolio by disregarding the construction year and then shrink everything to building height, or if you really shrink everything in terms of a single building height and a single, say, construction period, that's what you're going to get. And from time to time, not this one, this is marginal, but from time to time, one can face as a modeler portfolio granularity at this level, only considering the, say, construction in periods, or only considering the building heights, and very rarely disregarding the whole thing. So what if you have your portfolio well detailed, then of course the vulnerabilities, you will be sort of describing the whole thing in your whole damage properly by your vulnerabilities. But if you say don't know anything about your physical properties of the portfolio, then of course you will be only presenting your damage through a single vulnerability line or vulnerability relation. And as I told you, this or this can happen, and very rarely this can happen as well. So we want to see how these things are affecting the loss before performing detailed Kahramanmaraş analysis. The other thing is the most challenging case here, the consideration of two sequential events. So essentially, what you have here, this is the original vulnerability curve that you can use in your say damage estimations for the first earthquake, and then you have to make a smart move, rescale or modify this original vulnerability curve in the horizontal axis, in the ground motion axis, and in the damage axis by to consider properly the loss accumulation from the first event and the second event, given that these two events are sequential. And for that, we have used several modifying functions of the first or original vulnerability model. Then, I mean, these are some of the cases which I'm showing just for this presentation. So, for example, case 1 and case 2 indicates that portfolio or represents that the portfolio exhibits very slow deterioration after the first earthquake, or slow deterioration after the first earthquake. Case 3, so this is what you're going to expect if your structures are in good shape in terms of codes and everything. In the third case, what you're mimicking is that the portfolio exhibits moderate deterioration. So this is sort of your buildings are not so good, but not so bad as well, which you can learn it from the portfolio granularity. And then these two cases essentially indicate that the portfolio quickly or very quickly deteriorates, which is the case for very bad structures badly designed or not under-designed against earthquakes and so forth. Of course.
Sinan Hocam, sorry.
All right, I know. I'm just. So essentially, based on these things, we have performed several sensitivity analyses, and for each case, we use the base case, which is the simplest modeling. So we are assuming everything is lumped at each sub-province center. The portfolio is lumped at each sub-province center, and then we are not considering any uncertainty in the vulnerability. We are making, we are using only the mean vulnerability curves, and then we represent the site conditions with an average soil condition. And then we, in each case, we change one of the parameters, and then normalize the loss with the base case, all right? So the first case is, again, the portfolio is lumped at the sub-province center, but now we are using distributed vulnerability models. But site condition is again represented by mean VS30. And for the second case, again, the portfolio is lumped at the sub-province centers, but the mean vulnerability curves are being used, but we are considering the uncertainty in site conditions. And in the third case, we're using distributed portfolio over 0.025 degrees grids, but again, we're using mean vulnerability curves and then average site conditions. Now, note that we have, in this analysis, I'm showing you the results of TCIP, which is a huge portfolio in terms of number of policies and everything. And then, now this is again, I'm going to show you the cases. And now we are using, as for the case 4, we are focusing on the granularity of the portfolio. So the base case, which is the same in the previous one, the portfolio as is, and the mean vulnerabilities and mean VS30 values, which is the same case here as is portfolio. But then we are playing with the granularity of the portfolio. In this case, case 4, we are disregarding the building height, and then in case 5, we are disregarding the year built, and in case 6, the worst case, the marginal case, we're disregarding both building and year built. Now, this one here, the normalized losses in terms of their distributions for each cases. Well, what I see here is that the portfolio granularity, which is represented by these 3 cases, as well as the portfolio distribution, plays significantly larger role with respect to site conditions and vulnerability uncertainty. This is again with some reservation I'm showing you, again for large, very large portfolios, which is many times the case for the reinsurance portfolios. The left panel here shows the first event, and the second panel here shows the second event. The picture is, of course, numbers are different, but the picture is more or less the same. Now, this one here shows essentially the approaches, the modeling approaches that one can use while aggregating the sequential effects of these 2 major events. Here, the base case is you perform the loss for the first event and you perform the loss for the second event, and then what you do is the case 1, case 2, and case 3, case 4, case 5. All right, and then take the maximum of these 2. Take the maximum loss of event 1 or an event 2. So this is represented as the base case, And then we have case 1 to case 5. We are essentially, we're essentially implementing each one of these models and then normalize the results with the base case. And again, as you see here, by picking up the, cases, assuming that the portfolio is, has strong, buildings or well-designed buildings, the difference between case 1 and case 2 and base case is not that much different. But when you start focusing on the assumption that the portfolio is composed of badly designed, bad quality structures, then essentially the losses you compute from these two assumptions make a huge difference with the base case, which assumes that, which considers the maximum of the first and maximum loss of the first and second earthquakes by running them separately. Essentially, based on this, on these observations, we performed our loss analyses and we sort of improved our loss modeling in CAT mode, both for estimating loss right after the Kahramanmaraş earthquakes, as well as for the earthquake that is expected to occur in the Marmara Sea, which we call it as so-called Istanbul case. Essentially, for large portfolios, what we are observing from the Kahramanmaraş earthquake sequences is that uncertainties in spatial distribution of portfolio and portfolio granularity, which means knowledge about the most important physical attributes of the portfolio, affect the loss estimations more than the uncertainties associated with soil conditions and vulnerability model. They do have a weight, but their weight or their significance is not as much as the portfolio granularity and spatial distribution of portfolio. The other point that we learned is that the consideration of sequential events, if you have a single risk, it is fine. You can do very detailed analysis. But if you have a portfolio, which is we're facing most of the time in loss modeling, then you have to make smart assumptions. And essentially, just by looking at the granularity of your portfolio, just by looking at the year built, the building height, and so forth, we have come up a procedure in CAT mode making different, modifications to the original vulnerability model to account for the effect of sequential events on the aggregated loss. All right, I'm very sorry because I know I'm over my presentation time. Thank you very much for your consideration. The audience can type me for asking questions, or at the end of this panel, I will be happy to answer the questions. Thank you, Rami Bey.
Sinan Hocam, thank you very much for your important presentation. And also it gave us very scientific aspects. Actually,
yeah, this is my problem, actually. This is my problem. I cannot isolate myself.
As far as I know that you have lots of different scenario analysis, especially for potential Marmara earthquakes. So by using PGA, PGV, and some other statistical and probabilistic approach as well. So it is really very, very important having this kind of different scenario analysis. So actually, Sinan Hocam, I would like to ask you a question. So how will the results of Maraş earthquake affect the inputs of your model in terms of BI, business interruption losses? Is there any correlation between physical losses and BI losses as well?
Yes, of course. Actually, business interruption is quite difficult to model because there are many side effects that can amplify the profit loss due to business interruption. The structural damage, the content damage, the compound effect of structural and content damage are the components, are the elements we are considering in CAT mode to estimate business interruption. In the near future, we will be also assuming, we will be considering the damage in the lifeline systems that would affect the business when there is no connection in terms of electricity or the other, say, essential needs for that business, and how the loss BI, business interruption, will be amplified, we will see. But currently, we're focusing on the BI, considering the damage in the structural system, damage in the content, and the compound effect of content and building damage, building response. It makes it makes a difference, and now the data have started to flow from the region, the BI loss data, the real actual data, and then we will see in the near future how we should with those field reports.
Sinan Hocam, thank you very much. It's a missing part indeed in the insurance sector. So it will be very helpful if it's going to be modeled.
Yeah, we do have a model. Yeah. We do have a model. It has limitations, but fair enough at this moment. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sinan Hocam. Now, Anna Sis-Wheeler will be the next speaker from Swiss Re. Let me give brief information about her background. Anna is currently the market head for Switzerland and the Mediterranean, with overall responsibility for the P&C business in 6 markets, including Turkey. Anna joined Swiss Re almost 15 years ago and worked in different roles across the organization, from group strategy, operations to client markets. She also worked in Brazil for Swiss Re, where she was responsible for the Chilean market and key Latin American clients. Anna began her career working in private sector development in Washington, D.C. at the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. Anna holds an undergraduate and master's degree in economics from University of Geneva and a master's degree in international business from Georgetown University in the USA. Welcome, Anna, and now the stage is yours, please.
Thank you, Faribe, for your kind introduction. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Let me try also to share my screen, and you tell me if you can see it. Faribe, is this working?
Yes, it's working, Anna.
Okay, wonderful. So let me just a minute. Okay, so I was going to share also some observations from this tragic and very distinct earthquake, but it was covered extensively already. As you know, or some of you don't know, but at Swiss Re, we also have a team of R&D modelers and earthquake specialists, and we rely on our own modeling. So let me just highlight maybe 2 for this audience, and it's really about how distinct this earthquake was in terms of the geographical scale. I always mention how impressive it is. As you can see on the slide, it's the size of my home country, Switzerland. And we've heard it also from Sinan and Laura, the rupture of almost 200 kilometers. That's how large it was. We also mentioned how this region has been silent for many years for large events. And so maybe an historical perspective to share over the past 100 years, if we look 1920 to 20, we registered around 21 earthquakes above 7 of magnitude and around 5 above 7.5, and 10 had a depth between 10 and 20 kilometers. It speaks to the high seismicity of the region. And so maybe quickly, before we jump into what to expect at renewal and future expectations, let me go back to the why and why we can expect a shift to happen. And I think we heard a lot about the modeling predictions and the modeling outputs by all my fellow panelists, and also some limitations to the earthquake models and the adjustments that are looked at. So maybe let me highlight two. The first one is aftershock risk that Sinan also covered very well. As we know, each large earthquake triggers aftershocks, and we have seen many, and most models basically neglect to consider aftershocks, resulting in underestimation of the risk. So models are based on the long term and are not suited for costing earthquake risk immediately after a large earthquake. And that's why it's also important to keep that in mind, because we will have to define a loading to the affected region. And this is to take into account the increased seismicity after aftershocks, the increased vulnerability of buildings that we've just heard about also affected by the earthquakes, and increased systemic vulnerability of the region that I know Joseph will also, I'm sure, cover around the loss amplification effect, demand surge, etc. I won't go into it. To the second limitation of earthquakes, and it was a great question actually, Faribe, you just asked about business interruption, and I couldn't agree more. Earthquake models are very good to predict assessing risk to structures. So when we talk about property, physical damage, compared to single risk with complex business interruption, that requires complex and detailed data, and a special attention, I would say, to really the knowledge, deep knowledge of underwriters of our specific clients and their portfolios. So maybe my key message here would really be, as each insurance, reinsurance, and actor of this industry will reflect on the accuracy of its own model that it used or it developed and how well it did to predict the estimated losses, our adjustments are always needed to reflect also the increased uncertainty. And proper earthquake underwriters requires more than a model. And so maybe just additional thoughts that I might throw into the round after such events, many lessons learned. So I'm just going to pick on two, and it's really around how to manage accumulation across the market. So from a reinsurance perspective, we will continue to look at the accumulation across portfolios. That means property, that means engineering, large risks, life. And so with such a large event, it always raises awareness as to the portfolio view and portfolio underwriting in addition to every single risk and treaty. And two, as we heard a lot about modeling and limitations, the questions that we're discussing the most right now is really how do we embed such learnings into the decision-making process when it comes to purchasing NatCat protection. How much is enough? How much is adequate? How does each portfolio look and is distinct? And so finally, as we think about the upcoming renewals, but I hope to say above and beyond, right? And how we gather learnings and relate to this as a whole industry, let me share my 3 points. Certainly the first one is the increased uncertainty needs to be factored in and will impact price expectations. No doubt about that. Number two, we need more disciplined modeling and more power to disciplined underwriting. And here I will mention the increase in primary rates. That's key to ensure the balance across the value chain, to make sure we can afford also the reinsurance protection as it will become more expensive. We need to ensure there's adequate margins going forward to the assumed volatility and to ensure sustainability of the insurance and the reinsurance market. So 3, as I reflect, I think there's the good news where we can all contribute to get even better and to drive better insights into the exposures of insurance portfolios. And the Turkish market is already doing well on this front. Why is this important? This is important to improve the risk assessment and the underwriting. And for that, we need to capture more granular data. Sinan really exposed and explained us really well how this also flows into the loss models. And so what type of insights are we talking about? The one that I would highlight, and I think is really critical, is to understand and to quantify the underlying values, the relationship between the total property building value and the insured value, because the data is key here for us as an industry to avoid making too many assumptions that add huge uncertainties. And to that, certainly, as we've already seen here, the impact of the geographical location, we talked about the construction types, and you can imagine that as we assess vulnerability to earthquakes, those factors, the construction codes, their implementation, the ongoing efforts to retrofit buildings for improved performance is critical. I won't repeat, but Sinan very eloquently mentioned site condition, soil condition, and in addition, maybe I can just add the importance of exposure data to capture the latest inflation developments. And so finally, as we also think of adequately capturing and reflecting exposure, one also very key element for the Turkish market is exposures in original currency to better anticipate and also manage the FX risk for both insurers and reinsurers. So maybe to sum it up from my point of view, any efforts to reduce the uncertainties, to improve the risk assessment, and to really understand and match the actual exposures will really key in the next month. And I'm convinced that risk managers who incorporate that risk assessment, that have the right tools and data, and do acknowledge the growing exposures, will be best positioned to access and secure global capacity. Certainly representing here Swiss Re, which is an honor. There's no doubt about our commitment to continue supporting this market and our clients. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this very valuable presentation. Actually, you mentioned very strategic information regarding to the 2024 reinsurance renewals and what must be foreseen by Turkish insurance companies as well. So actually, I have a question to you. For 2024 reinsurance renewal, do you have any specific recommendation to the regulator, such as earthquake tariff, risk assessment, etc.?
Thank you. Very, very important question that we haven't touched upon. Maybe I'd look at it maybe at 3 levels, right? And looking at the regulator who was looking to protect the insured and to ensure the health and the sustainability of the insurance and the reinsurance industry, to really be looking at how adequate the limits are to be purchased and to look at the sustainability of the rates. So this would certainly be one. And then second, and maybe a bit beyond, obviously, the building regulatory framework, when we look at land usage and building code administration, is a key component, as we've just discussed. And maybe third, certainly a component is the improved or looking at really the affordability and the insurability of earthquake, and looking at, we've just discussed, right, consensus around 5 billion north of insured losses, and we're looking at in economic losses above 25 up to 100 billion is the estimate. So this would probably be the third point.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Now, the next speaker is from Turkish markets. Süha will have the presentation about the impact of Maraş earthquake to Turkish market, lessons learned about this tragic event. Welcome, Süha Bey. Before you start your presentation, I would like to introduce you to our audience. Süha Bey has been working for Eureko Insurance Company as COO and member of the board. He has master's degree in business administration. He began his career in 1998 as a reinsurance specialist at Universal Insurance Company and joined Eureko Insurance, former Garanti Sigorta, in 1999. He worked in reinsurance and special risk departments as manager until 2004, and then he became director. In 2010, he was appointed as the group director for non-motor claims, underwriting, and reinsurance departments responsibility until 2011. Süha Çele has been the COO and since 2012. He has also been a member of the board of directors since 2014. Now the stage is yours, Süha Bey, please.
Thank you, Fahri Bey. I hope you can see my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, perfect.
Now you should do it again.
Okay.
Disappeared. Yes.
I'll also try to keep it short. I would like to summarize and express my views as an insurance company professional. What have been the lessons learned for this tragic earthquake? So this earthquake, as Sinan Hocam and then Laura mentioned, is the biggest in our history. We lived in 99, our generation lived in 99 earthquake, and this is little different than the 99, and frankly, a little bigger than the 99 earthquake. Therefore, I would like to summarize the lessons learned part into three categories. The first part is the before the earthquake. What should have been done before the earthquake? As we all know, I think insurance companies, reinsurance companies, we all have our BCMs in force, so business continuity managements. We made sure that our systems are in force, our people are in force. If something happens to Mr. X, who is going to look after that is there. We checked our business partners, our disaster centers are outside the key zone. So everything has been done in the BCM part. However, is it really enough, or should we bring another perspective into this? I think might need to be considered, because at least as far as I was concerned, I believe also an operation center outside the key zone is a good view going forward. Second one, after these are ready, the reliability of the accumulation data. So we have to make sure that our exposure is reflecting the real exposure on the date of time of the report. And it includes basically some factors like inflation. I'm not only mentioning the inflation for the Turkish lira exposure, but also for the euro and dollar exposure. So in hard currency, there's also inflation. Is it factored in? Have we really considered our unknown accumulations like cargoes, like mobile machinery? Maybe I can combine this with the unmodeled exposure. So like Casco, PA, cargo exposure elsewhere, etc. What are we doing, and how are we coding our multi-locational risks into our systems? If there is, let's say, a big group operating in every part of the Turkey, is it coded under Istanbul, or is it coded under the highest sum insured? What is your policy in that? The first loss policies. Out of $1 billion, sometimes we are giving, let's say, 100 million first loss. And then is this first loss captured properly in your modeling exposure? Have we considered enough our special clauses? Like in the big industrial wordings, we are giving denial of access covers, ingress egresses, supplier and customer extensions, contingent business interruptions. How are those captured in our exposure data? And last but not least, what is the fragility of the content being reported? So let's assume that we have a plant in let's say in the key zone, the building structure is enough, but maybe the content is fragile, and let's assume that it is glasses and it's tilted in the earthquake. So does it really reflected in the real exposure? Are, to me, all lessons learned for the going forward. Last, before the earthquake part, the modeling assumptions. We all know that we are reporting the year of build, the construction types, pre and post 99, number of stories of the buildings, etc. But to me, in my view, we have to reflect also our view of risk into the model and maybe adjust the model curves according to our risk perception. These can be adjusted for secondary perils with the fire and tsunami following. Maybe we should take off the PLA from the model and load our own PLA loading into the model. Is the business interactions really effectively monitored in the model? Liquefaction effect, etc., etc. I think all should reflect our view of risk. Within all these, we are deciding our company's future reinsurance buying and also contingency plans. I think these must be revisited to be able to be prepared for a future earthquake before it happens. Last part I have to mention here is the hours clause. From this earthquake triggered me at least. What should be the optimum hour clause for an earthquake catastrophe? Is it really 72 hours? Is it 108? Is it what is it? Is it 144? What is the best hour clause for our portfolios? Now the Maraş earthquake is it is 2 events, and the second one is called to be the triggering earthquake, and therefore from insurance practice it is 1 event. But should we really revisit our hours clauses, etc., is to me key for the before the earthquake part. Now during the earthquake part, what are the lessons learned? First of all, the loss adjusters. Even from accommodation, starting from the accommodation, it's been a problem. So there are losses that will take time, and we have to make sure that our loss adjusters are safely there looking after our losses. The training and readiness should be there for our loss adjusters, because we should not really talk to the loss adjuster after the quake happens or a cat happens what to do. We have to make sure that technological solutions are incorporated in our loss adjusting, like drones, for example, is a good task to at least visualize the roofs. And for the loss adjuster part, of course, as the resources are scarce, we have to make sure that industry level prioritization is needed. So if there's a loss of company X to company Y, whoever has the biggest BI exposure, for example, needs to be treated first, than the other one. Second one that we learned from this earthquake is different parties are requesting different reports, different, let's say, insights about it. Our shareholder is asking for reports. Our regulator is asking for reports.
Suhabe,
yes.
excuse me. Can you please change the slides, because you are just showing your first slide.
I did, but
no, but no. It is not.
So actually, Suhabe, can you make it full screen?
It is full screen, but let me share it.
Everybody has waited for me to call you to tell you that.
No.
I am the T-wrapped Menekşe. I am the one who is rupturing.
Yes, now it's okay, Suhabe.
It's okay.
Great.
So where I was left, different parties requiring different reports, and we have, of course, data studios, but different, let's say, reports need different treatment, and especially different professionalism. A report that is requested by the shareholder is not necessarily same with the reinsurer, so you have to be agile in providing these reports. The third one is the client communication. For the most of the clients there have suffered from this earthquake. Either they lost, some of them lost their lives, some of them lost their, let's say, families. So it is quite a sensitive thing. In such a catastrophe or such a tragedy, how to communicate your clients, especially for the salvage and rescue operations, is really very difficult. Having said about the salvage and rescue, of course, we face some cases like, for example, the building is standing still, but the roof is collapsing. We have to make sure that the roof is taken out properly to make sure that at least the machinery or content in the building is safe and secure. but most of the time we bumped into the safety issues or regulatory issues or governmental issues that are blocking us to do these salvage operations. Advance payment necessaries. Most of the time we are asked to pay advance payment on even day one, but based on what? So this is quite sensitive, at least for our company, that we have to pay something, but at the same time we have to make sure that these are properly documented. It is not more than the actual loss, etc. And to reduce the cost of claim, you have to be quick, because there are supply chain issues, there are other issues. You have to be quick in this, therefore it needs a separate treatment. Another one, I'm also looking at the hour, so I'll try to fasten. The policy conditions recognition. What I meant was most of our clients recognize what the policy terms and conditions are after the earthquake, and some of them even we have to explain what the earthquake coinsurance is. So therefore it is another lesson learned that before an event happens, we make sure that we explain proper clauses to the clients. Demand surge and PLA issue, I'm not touching on to that because Joseph will touch on to that. I'll finish this slide with the employee care, because you have to adjust these claims through your employees, and your employees' mood is also down after an earthquake, so you have to make sure that these are motivated. Last but not least, the cash call clauses. In our market, the cash call clauses are you have to first pay, then collect the claim. But in this catastrophe, I think there is another lesson learned, that the wording needs to be changed, because you first need to collect and then pay. Frankly, all of our reinsurers, I think, in the market are treating positively to that. Nobody is asking or urging companies to pay first, but this is also another lessons learned for me. Now for the future, I changed the slide. Did it change also?
Yes, there is no problem.
Okay. Now after the earthquake part, to be prepared for the future catastrophes, we all know that the catastrophes will happen. It is happening and it will happen. Therefore, we have to keep rerunning our BCMs, be preparing ourselves, and maybe quarterly running our tabletop tests to be fully prepared. Second one is the payback period of the losses. I divide it into three pieces, because there are, to me, three tasks on three parties. One of them is the insurance companies. So insurance companies have to make sure that the underwriting discipline is back on the stage, and the future payback is possible within this strategy. Second one, it falls under the regulator. To me, there needs to be a revisit of the earthquake tariff going forward. And third, falls under the clients. Of course, there's also a task to the clients to make sure that they are taking really precautions to prevent recurrence of such an event. The third one is the sustainability of the reinsurance capacity, including retro markets. Why I write including retro markets? Because retro capacity is decisive on the reinsurance capacity, and our reinsurers, if not all of them, most of them is buying retro covers. The scarcity over there or hardening market over there will directly affect us. We have to find the right balance between the sustainability of the reinsurance capacity and the hardening terms. We are, as Anna mentioned, we are aware of the increasing prices, but to what extent and what is the right balance is, to me, the key driver going forward. The last part is the rerun of BCM. So as I mentioned, we have to rerun our BCMs to make sure that we are prepared for in the maximum possible way for a next cat. I think this concludes my presentation. So I'm now switching off.
Javi, thank you very much for your valuable presentation. You mentioned very interesting topics, especially on lessons learned, which are in line with our global speakers' insights indeed. Here, I would like to ask you a question, not directly related with your presentation, but it is the really another important for Turkish market. What's your opinion on the capacity needed for Turkish insurance market at the renewal? Will first-class reinsurers have enough appetite to allocate the capacity to Turkish market? And what if they don't have?
Well, good question. I think, well, capacity should be there at a price, but what is the price will be the question mark, number one. Second, currently, as insurance companies, what limit are we going to buy is also going to be decisive on the future pricing, because now one model at the same return period provides, let's say, output X, second model 2X, third model 3X. So if you buy 1X, you may be short. If you buy 3X, you may be buying more than you need and perhaps spending more than you need. What is the right balance within this is the art for us to play as reinsurance specialists, in my view. And the answer of that will be decisive on the future earthquake availability or capacity availability. My renewal is 1.7 for the cat, so I'm in the market for the cat. Yes, there is capacity, but prices are going very sharply high.
Thank you very much. It's a very big issue, important issue for the renewal indeed. So now our last but not least speaker is Joseph Hara from Advolora. In his presentation, he will mainly focus on business interruption and post-loss amplification and demand surge issues. Let me give about Joseph's background. Joseph has over 30 years experience in loss adjustment, risk assessment, and consulting of various types of insurance and reinsurance losses, risks including property, mechanical and electronic losses, and liability. He is a mechanical engineer and graduated from the Polytechnical University in Istanbul. He is qualified and licensed as a loss adjuster and witness expert in Turkey and Spain. After working in an engineering company specialized in design of power plants, he started his loss adjuster career in 1992, dedicated to industrial claims in Spain. He is also one of the founders of Advolora in 2003. He is currently working as a director of Advolora Middle East Hub office located in Turkey, Israel, and deputy director of Madrid office in Spain. Welcome, Joseph. The stage is yours, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Suhabe and to all the organization for allowing me to be here. It's a pleasure. As loss adjusters, we are working on the dark side of the business, which means that we are on site and we see the disaster, we see the suffering of people, and this is very sad. That's why I would like to say that well, after being so many times on the earthquake side, seeing so many damage, I will say that I would have preferred that this conference had not taken place, which would mean that this tragic event had not occurred. But unfortunately, we are here. As all the participants mentioned, the earthquake took place on 6th of February. There were mainly two 7.8 and 7.5 magnitude earthquake. One of them lasted 90 seconds. This is, I mean, apart from the intensity, magnitude of the earthquake, it's an eternity. I mean, it's 90 seconds in an earthquake is unbelievable. And these earthquakes, they were followed by more than 7,500 aftershocks. And as you know, it resulted in the largest disaster to hit the country in over 80 years. And the disaster have inflicted the heaviest damage in 11 provinces in southern Turkey. These regions unfortunately have some of the highest poverty rates in Turkey, and also 1.7 million of Syrian refugees are located in this area. The report highlights that more than 80% of damage occurred in the Hatay region, Hatay, Kahramanmaraş, Gaziantep, Malatya, and Adıyaman. And to tell you the truth, on Sunday I have to go to Gaziantep, and I mean my foot are going backwards, as we say in Turkey. Let me see. Excuse me. Well, these are some pictures that we took personally. This is such a big disaster. This is landing piste of the airport. This is the highway. Well, this is the situation we are facing in this region. The economic losses are estimated over 25 billion, and the road to recovery is expected to take several years. As stated by our colleagues from RMS, the insured losses from the disaster are estimated over $5 billion. This includes damage to real estate, household contents, as well as business interruption in residential, commercial, and industrial sectors in that region. However, we believe that this estimation, all the estimation we have, they do not include post-event loss amplification, or in other words, loss to non-modeled exposures occurred during the damage. What is post-loss amplification? Well, is the cost associated to the loss, which are increased or amplified beyond the initial estimated loss. I mean, to be practical, I mean, if you think that one loss amounts to 1 million, at the end it can, because due to the post-loss amplification, it can come up to 1.5 million. This is PLA. And well, sometimes, as it is stated before, when such a loss, such a catastrophe happens, the insurance companies, they send the loss adjuster to site to have a first idea of the loss amount. Unfortunately, the loss adjuster, we tend many times to be very optimistic, and we don't take into account the PLA factor, and this is a very important problem once we are at the end of the loss adjustment process. The PLA, I have to say, it was coined by RMS following Hurricane Katrina, and it has become a recognized term of art among actuarial scientists, along with other subordinate terms also invented by RMS. By the way, my company, or the company where I work happily, has an extensive office in Latin America, and we participated in the Hurricane Katrina, and we know the extent of damage. Several factors contribute to post-loss amplification. Well, one common factor is the discovery of hidden or latent damage that were not immediately visible during the initial assessment. I mean, when you go to a region where everything had suffered such a big damage, you become a little bit blind. I mean, when you see a roof or some pillars still standing, you think that it can be, it is useful, it can be salvaged, and it can be reused. But unfortunately, there are many damage that we cannot see, and this damage we cannot see it in the initial assessment, and after by the time passing, this damage can become visible and can mean that the amount is higher of the initially casted. Well, something very important is that the time can amplify the damage. This is a very important issue which correspond to loss adjusters to guide the insured and the insurers, everybody, because the loss adjuster have to be very practical and to avoid delaying repairs, because with the time the repairs can become more severe. And of course, I have to say that the loss adjusters, they have to ask for support from the restoration companies. There are many in Turkey, and of course, the involvement of these companies in the first stage of after the loss may help to decrease the damage, or at least may help to avoid more damage. One of the issues when there is a delay in the repair of damage is the cost. I mean, when you leave the site without, or the machine or the site, or we are talking about earthquake region, without assistance, if you leave them unattended, well, the amount, the nature and extent of damage can increase. Well, in the beginning of my presentation, I showed you the situation of railways, the highways. That means that in case of a catastrophe like the one in Maraş, the transport can become a real matter. And if we have problems to transport, well, at the end, the cost of everything would increase. The material prices will become higher because of problems in the transport. The same thing happened with the labor cost. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I've been many times in the region, and I'm asking to myself how we are going to be able to rebuild all these destroyed buildings. I mean, it sounds unfortunately very difficult, for not saying impossible. So we need labor, we need transport, we need materials, and we don't have it. We don't have it enough on the same time. So this then it caused the kind of inflation in the cost of material. Well, there is when there is a catastrophe of the size of the earthquake in Marash, there are hundreds of thousands of claims. So it becomes a moment that the insurance companies, they can't cope with so much claims. So the insurers had set high no claims assessor threshold because they cannot cope with so many claims. Well, this is more or less the same thing, is that because of huge demand, there is an inflation of labor and in material prices. And although just in the moment before the earthquake, the industries or the houses had a correct some insurers, after the earthquake, with the sum insured, unfortunately, it's not enough to rebuild the houses or the machinery. Well, nevertheless, there is another issue, is that politicians pressure. It might be incompatible with the correct adjustment and correct construction prices. Sometimes everybody in the sector, we are under a kind of politic pressure, and this can lead the increase of the cost. Well, this is something that we are seeing. We're finding a lot in these days. Many of the, especially we find this case in industries where the factories, they suffered a huge loss, and let me say that they had a almost total loss. So the management of the factory, they decide, look, I want to stay here, but I want to build I want to make an improvement. I want to build a stronger structure in my factory. So it's a problem, because of course, I mean, the owner of the industry can make improvements of in his property, and he should do it, of course, but not on the cost of policies or the insurance companies. Well, something similar occurs because of the change in the modern seismic building codes. I mean, as we know, after each catastrophe, the seismic building codes are improved, and they have more protection, and they have more strength to support this kind of earthquakes. But again, the improvement should not be on the shoulders of policy. I mean, we know that the application of seismic building codes are necessary, but the cost should be borne by the owner or by the interested, not by the insurance company.
Joseph Bey, last 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Well, there is one more aspect that which is a result of the previous one, is the PLA in BI claims. Because of the improvements the insurers wants to undertake, sometimes the business, the construction work, they last more than what it should be in normal times, and this makes of course the BI loss be higher. So the loss adjuster has to be keen here to bear in mind that this factor and to make the necessary adjustment, and he has to bear in mind the market trends, seasonality, and other business specific variables he has to consider in order to adjust accurately the real loss. And well, the conclusions in two words. Well, the insurance companies, they must be very careful with the post-loss amplification risk. They should not be very optimistic in many cases in the moment to set the reserve. And of course, the same thing is for loss adjusters. They have to be very careful managing the post-loss amplification, which require a thorough and meticulous investigation process. Thank you very much.
Joseph, thank you very much for your important presentation, especially your recommendations on post-loss amplification studies for insurance sector are very valuable. We all understand that these studies will have a direct impact on risk assessment and underwriting processes as well. So now that is the Q&A session. Actually, a couple comment and notes that I'm going to answer immediately. Çağdaş Bey, thank you very much for your comments. And also, Andrew, yes, the presentation is going to be shared in our website. Menekşe Hanım is going to give more details. And now, all the panelists can access the Q&A part. So just I'm going to address whom is going to answer the question. So therefore, the panelist is going to ask the questions first, and then shortly they are going to answer afterwards because of the limited time that we have indeed. So the first one, Paul Della Marta. Laura, would you please answer his question? And the second, Mohammed Saad Zakol, I think I can pronounce right. So actually, Sinan Hocam, would you please answer this question as well? And the third one, Lonas Moktat, Joseph, so you can answer this question. Liu, Laura, again, you can answer this question if it's possible. And then Johan Vosner, Sinan Hocam, again, we are expecting, because he also showed the address directly to you. Again, Mohammed, another question. Süha, we are expecting your answer. It's related with you. And Lonas, Süha, again, that's the second one for you. From Ertan Fırat, Anna, would you please answer Ertan Bey's question? And Mohammed Saad, also Sinan Hocam, that is also related with your part. Another Mohammed questions about co-insurance. Süha, it's your part if you answer Mohammed's question. For Ferdi Çelebi, and also it's related with the reinsurance as well. Anna, would you please answer this question? Okay, thank you very much to everybody.
Fahri Bey, excuse me, Fahri Bey, which question of Mohammed Saad will I be answering?
So actually, Mohammed's questions just after Ertan Bey. After Ertan Bey.
But this is, I think, more related retro capacity. This is related to retro capacity.
Yes, Turkish cat pool. It might be for TCIP like this. If also Anna can answer this question as well.
Fahri Bey, maybe, maybe we can do the following. Maybe you can read the question, because the other participants who are here cannot see it.
Okay.
So if you read the question and you can address it to the...
Okay, so
this is
I
better.
thought...
Please, you read them one by one. Thank
Okay,
you.
I thought the panelists can read, but I'm going to read, okay? No matter. So the first question, Paul Della Marta, given that your stochastic model did not have any magnitude 7.5 or larger events, can we assume that the risk of loss was underestimated? Yes, Laura, please.
Thank you for the question. So we acknowledge that we didn't have close representation for the events in February in our existing event set, which is why we came up with the user-defined magnitudes. And with that, we were able to select magnitudes that better represented the true seismic moment that was released. So I would certainly suggest that you use the user-defined events when looking at potential loss estimates rather than the stochastic events, because we recognize that the stochastic events will underrepresent the view of risk. On top of that, we would suggest summing the losses from both the 7.8 and 7.5 user-defined events. And also a recommendation we've been given in many of our conversations is to use slightly more vulnerable exposure coding options than you may have. And so what we're suggesting is to use, for example, one of the older year built bands to represent the fact that the newer construction post 1999 actually didn't perform as well as we expected. On top of that, we recommend coding all primary characteristics, and we can give some guidance on sort of typical combinations that make sense for that in order to be able to make use of a secondary modifier that reflects the poor construction quality. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into your question with respect to local site conditions and complexities, but there are sort of initial recommendations, and we can certainly follow up with you if you have more questions around that.
Thank you, Laura. The next question from Mohammed. Sinan Hocam, it's for you. Does the loss amount include the total loss buildings only, or the constructive total losses as well? It is buildings which are still standing but will need to be demolished and rebuilt from scratch.
So our loss estimations actually are firstly based on structural damage, but we are considering, because these are insured or reinsured portfolios, we are considering the total insured value while calculating the losses of each risk, which could be the content as well, which could be the structure as well, which could be the combination of these two as well. I mean, all of these. But we, as I stated, because we are dealing with insurance and reinsurance agreements, we are capped by we are capping our results with the insurance reinsurance agreements. We're calculating the round-up losses without implementing the say agreement conditions, considering the structural damage, content damage, and then on top of it, we start implementing the agreement conditions. So that's how we do it. So essentially, we do consider the structural damage.
Thank you very much, Selon Hocam. And also, Selon Hocam, you can continue for the next question as well. What is the return period of the Maraş earthquakes? If this Maraş earthquake happened in Istanbul, what would the estimated economic loss and insured loss be?
Okay, so based on the historical events in hand for that region, I would say the annual occurrence rates of Maraş earthquakes would change from 1/500 to 1/1000, but this is very gross, essentially. So per year, the occurrence rate would be around 1/500 to 1/1000, considering the historical events in the region only. And then the question is then what? What's the rest of the question?
So
What would have been the Istanbul quake in a given same return period?
What would have been the Istanbul quake, the loss? When you are dealing with the event-based losses, so when you are calculating the losses for a specific event, then it would be hard to talk about a return period because you are tailoring everything for a specific event, all right? And there is a confusion in the return period of loss and then the return period or occurrence rate of earthquakes. These are two different issues. The return period of loss not only depends on the return period of earthquake, but also it depends on the type of structural system, the capacity of that structural system in terms of response and earthquake response and so forth. So essentially, this is a tricky question. And for the Istanbul event, you can only make a good estimate for that specific of loss for that specific event. I cannot give a specific return period of that loss because it is also portfolio specific. From one portfolio to another, it will change.
thank you, Selon Hocam. Laura, probably you can answer the next question, and together with the same question, actually, in the previous question. And also the new question, how we can avoid in the Turkey earthquake, and also the prior questions, if you have any comments, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe I'll touch on the previous question first, seeing as Sinan has just commented on it. I suppose, again, to reiterate, the return period can be viewed from both a loss perspective, so what is the loss from that event and what return period does that correspond to, but also from a hazard perspective. I think at the moment there is still a lot of information to unfold with respect to the loss return period. I don't think that's something we're going to have a good understanding of for some time, particularly until we have the likes of all of the claims submitted, for example. From a hazard perspective, generally, if we take these kind of magnitudes events in this region along the East Anatolian fault zone, we consider a return period of between around 300 and 500 years. But as I mentioned, and we've many people have touched on, the seismicity in this region is quite episodic. There's lots of clustering events. So, for example, we saw 2 magnitude 7+ events in one day. Just back in February, we saw 4 across the century in the 1800s. So that return period has to be considered in the context of the wider context of clustering. In terms of an Istanbul similar kind of scenario, losses will be higher than we have seen for the Maraş sequence. This is very much dependent, though, as Sinan mentioned, on the specifics of the event. This was one event in a particular region. If we move even the same magnitude event to another part of the country, we're going to have different types of fault structures, different local site conditions. The building stock in that region is different. The types of buildings, the type, whether they're residential versus commercial, the coverage types are different. We have more in the line of business interruption. So yeah, that's a very complicated question. And as I mentioned earlier, something that we have been looking at as part of the stress test recently. So if anyone has any specific questions on how we can help you there, please get in touch. The second question was, how can we avoid the Istanbul earthquake? Is that correct?
Turkey.
So I mean, we can't, from a physiological perspective, we can't avoid the earthquakes. You know, they are going to happen as a result of the tectonics and the geology. I think these sequence of events have very much demonstrated that we really need to understand the building stock, truly how vulnerable is it? And as many people have touched on in the panel today, knowing what your exposure is. So if you the more information you can have around how tall your buildings are, when they were built, what type of occupancy they have, what building materials they are made from, the better understanding you can have to your potential exposure to such events. So Sinan mentioned how the larger uncertainty is often associated with the characteristics or lack of characteristics of a building rather than the event itself. I think beyond that, the questions become almost more philosophical and much further reaching than just the insurance industry. It's how does the country rebuild? What happens with building codes and adherence to building codes? And then beyond that, it's a case of providing as much insurance coverage as possible in order to help manage the sort of recoveries and losses from these sorts of events.
Thank you, Laura. Sinan Hocam, again, Johan asks directly to you. Question is, observed ground motions show strong spatial variations. One component is the directivity effect of the rupture. Second, however, is amplification at the site of interest. Looking at the Antakya City region observations, could you comment on the relative importance of directivity effects versus basin structure amplification effects on the ground motions, damage and loss in that region?
Well, I mean, this is a very good question, actually. I mean, I think I would say both are quite important. For the first event, for the first earthquake, there is a strong directivity effect because the rupture and the waveform, seismic waves, propagated towards the city of Antakya. So essentially, we see strong directivity effects, as I tried to present it in one of my slides. The strong motion stations in that region do show pulse-like signals indicating that there is directivity. And then these pulse-like signals have very long periods, which brings forward the importance of site response. And essentially, while estimating the ground motion in and within the Antakya region, we implemented a specific site response. And thanks to Jochen, because I forgot to mention it, we did implement a specific site response model while estimating the ground motion fields for the Antakya region. Thank you. So both are quite important.
Thank you very much, Sinan Hocam. Süha Bey, the next question is for you. Earthquake in Turkey has its tariff rates. Do you think these rates are expected to be reviewed upwards?
Well, I know it is being discussed, but I don't know the latest status and the regulators' decision on that. So it's on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. And also the other question, how much that the Turkey earthquake was cost to insurance, reinsurance companies? So we probably might have some information on roughly.
Insurance, reinsurance companies, I can only comment on maybe my company. So of my losses, 10% of it is my retention, 30% is my treaty, and 60% is FAC. Currently, the distribution is that. I don't expect this to be too different for the market, but
If
this
we
is what I
estimate
can only.
if we estimate the total amount of the loss is going to be roughly 4.55 billion US dollar as an insurance losses, so the split is going to be around what you mentioned, I think, yeah?
Well, excluding TCIP, this
Yeah.
should be roughly the distribution.
Okay, thank you very much.
In Fari, around reinsurance would pick up around north of 4 billion. It's about 80% of that would be with the reinsurance market.
Okay, Anna. Anna, thank you very much. And also it's your turn. Ertan Fırat is together with us. Question is, considering the reinsurers as investors, do they consider to allocate funds to Turkey for reconstruction of bad buildings, mostly to Marmara region, for the long-term benefits for all parties? For this strategic investment, what will be their conditions, asks, maybe modeling, etc.?
Great question. So I think reinsurance is clearly fundamental to the long-term reconstruction of society after devastating events such as this one, obviously. And first and foremost, by providing capacity. And I think we touched upon very much the expectations in the panel, right, in terms of understanding exposures, in terms of the data that we can improve on to improve our modeling and our underwriting. And maybe on the other side, I can only speak to Swiss Re, but I know that many companies have also, through their own foundations, supported Turkey. And for Swiss Re here, we have supported through the Better Shelter program to help affected people build temporary shelters for those that were rendered homeless. So offering them also safety and protection until they can return to their home. So doing our little bit also to help in this tragic context.
Thank you. Again, Anna, the next question is for you. Did the earthquake prove that the retro capacity for the Turkish cat pool and also for other companies was sufficient?
So good one. A short answer, as I say, so far what I see, I would say yes, right? We just mentioned the consensus around the insured loss and how much the reinsurer is picking up. I can only just say, again, insured loss is around 5 billion and economic loss is north of 25, but closer to the 80 billion mark. So time will tell on how we end up with the ultimates, but so far what I see is the answer is yes. Okay, thank you very much. And yes, Süha Bey, how would you evaluate the impact of the co-insurance and facultative operations in the Turkish on the accumulation inside the Turkish market?
Well, most probably he implied the close co-insurance. I think there's a co-insurance clause also under our treaty, so we have limits to accept, and then we are reporting it in our accumulation accordingly. I think all insurance companies does it like that, and the reinsurers behind are capping it with this co-insurance clause so that their exposure is at a level capped so that they can buy their retros accordingly. It is managed like that. So thank you very much. Ferdi Çelebi's question, Anna, probably you can answer this question again. I just wonder, how do reinsurers look to Turkey after that earthquake? Do you think the consequence of earthquake is acceptable in terms of favor of it? So what will be main advices from now on in their view?
Thank you. So clearly a severe, very severe large event, as we just mentioned, right? Pegging it at a 5 billion insured loss and potentially 80 billion or north. There's a range here for the economic loss. Shows a huge protection we got. Back to the insurance event and loss. This is exactly why reinsurance exists. This is why our industry is here. And in those times that we are here to foot also the spill. So I think every reinsurer will look at their loss and look at their market share and will be surprised or not surprised. From our Swiss Re perspective, that has not been unexpected in terms of our positioning. If you look at the reported loss from the reinsurance industry, what you can see in the reports, I think you can get to about 2.3 billion. The question is where, I would say, sorry, around the 1.8 billion mark. And the question is, where is the rest to reach the 4 billion? So I think time will tell also how the retro was impacted and what other reinsurers were impacted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Joseph, the next question is for you. So in your opinion, how much was the percentage of loss amplification related to removal of debris? Also, how many cases did you experience where you thought houses can be fixed, then it proved to be constructive total loss?
Joseph, you're on mute.
Oh, yeah. Well, the question is, we are not involved directly with house claims. We are involved always in this earthquake with industrial claims, energy plants, and factories. So I cannot disclose this information because I would send the wrong message to the insurance, and it's not very ethical. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. And the next question, again, Selen Hocam, I think it is related with you. And thanks to the panelists. And also, question is the issue that I hesitate the most while estimating the expected damage for the Istanbul earthquake is how to score the building quality. In the Maraş earthquake, we saw that buildings built after 2017 were also heavily damaged. Would it be appropriate to completely remove the year of construction from the model? Is it appropriate to add an assumption factor that the building quality is not as written? Yes.
I'm going to give my own perspective here. Firstly, I wouldn't recommend removing the year of construction because it's a basic but important argument for describing the damageability. One of the arguments for describing damageability of buildings. I mean, when for Turkey at least, for buildings, most of them I'm talking, built before 70s, they are not earthquake proof. They are no code buildings. So that is an important point to be considered in the vulnerabilities, in the damageability functions. Whereas, in my opinion, the vulnerabilities, they should have some sort of modeling uncertainty, which is actually implicitly described by Özlem Hanım, because the quality control plays an important role in structural behavior. And if you are addressing your vulnerability with some uncertainty, considering the construction quality, then you will be given room to the likelihood of large damages, even if the buildings are built in the recent years. So I hope I made myself clear. The uncertainty you embed into your vulnerabilities will certainly consider that kind of critical parameters implicitly, but they will. I hope I made myself clear.
Thank you very much, Sinan Hocam. Thank you. The last question from Bilge Hanım. My question is to Laura. Laura, it is directed to you. We have learned multiple faults should be taken into consideration if we consider that there are multiple faults in Marmara region. To what extent it will affect Marmara earthquake modeling results? Would you comment on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another good question. So in the current Moody's RMS earthquake model for Turkey, we don't currently consider the rupturing of multiple faults as one event. However, in our more recent earthquake models, many of those we have introduced multi-fault ruptures, and that is something we will definitely be looking at as part of this update to the Turkey model that's currently ongoing. There's a few important things to consider. So I can't comment on what effect it will have on the modeled loss, but important considerations that feed into the modeled loss are things like when we have multi-fault ruptures, essentially you are piecing together faults as one event. And so that can mean that the rupture is much longer than if just one part of that fault or one part of that branch ruptured as an event. So you have a larger impacted area, which on top of that often correlates with larger magnitude events. So from that perspective, you can think of multi-fault ruptures as some of the more extreme events. On top of that, you then have to start thinking, because you have impacted a wider area, there's also potential for higher loss correlations. So you may have two cities, for example, that are quite far apart. They, in a smaller event that is just one fault that ruptures, only one city might be impacted. But in a multi-fault rupture, you might actually get losses to both sets of those cities. And so there's sort of typically we consider these to be the most extreme events. So we would expect them to be larger losses than just if one part of the fault ruptured.
Okay, Laura, thank you very much. It was the end of the question.
Excuse me, can I just add a comment supporting Laura's views?
Yes, please.
All right, multi-rupture, in my opinion, for a region like Marmara, it should be considered, but with some level of probability, because multi-rupture cases means a significantly different stress variations between the neighboring fault segments, and this can only be, in my opinion, handled by studying different scenarios which can cause multiple ruptures, cascading events, and this should be considered in the analysis with some level of lesser probability, but yes, they should be considered.
Sinan Hocam, thank you very much for your contribution. So, Menekşe Hanım, if you let me give a couple words before closing the meeting by you. So actually today we are really very pleased to be together with all our distinguished speakers and interactive audience who participated with their questions. As the chairman of Insurance Practitioners Association and on behalf of its board, I would like to thank you again, Andre, Laura, Anna, Joseph, Süha, and Sinan Bey for your participation. We had a very efficient conference with important insights, outputs, and also recommendations. I would like to thank to our audience for their participations and questions. And special thanks to Menekşe Hanım and her team for their efforts on organization of this event. Now I am leaving the stage to Menekşe for closing the conference. Yes, Menekşe Hanım, please.
Thank you very much, Bahri Bey. I would like to express my gratitude, first of all, to the speakers headed by yourself and to these most valuable informations, and the participants who has been with us today all over the world, and they have also contributed with their questions. And also I would like to address my gratitude to Ahmet Yaşar, who has supported me a lot with all these sharings in social media and the preparation of our marketing material, and Hulki from IUC, our reinsurance director. he was really working very hard. Thank you very much, and we hope to be together on the 10th and 11th of October in Istanbul, 3 years, after 3 years, again, face-to-face conference of Insurance Practitioners Association will be held on the 10th and 11th of October in Istanbul. Save the date and we will keep you advised. Yes, thank you all for your participation and hope to meet you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.